I was curious if there's other sort of signs of totalitarianism within our society, like aside from this sort of like desire to sever people from the past. Like, is there other things that you see
Yeah.
that worry you?
So I'll break it into two big categories of things. The first is think about what kind of people are easiest to control. And the way that I would explain this is that totalitarianism thrives in an environment where people are atomized and very alone. So Hannah Arendt identified this too in her Origins of Totalitarianism. She talks about how the ideal subjects of totalitarian regimes are kind of the atomized mass of people. And what she's talking about, and this goes back to Edmund Burke, even Burke's critiques of the revolution in France, and his sort of foreseeing that it would lead very quickly to a tyrannical state, was the insight that our freedom is preserved through localized institutions, civil society institutions, family, church, local community, neighborhoods, the union, whatever it is. These insulate us against the absolute power of the state or of the market, I'll add. And these mediating institutions have become frayed and weakened, right? So the families are much weaker, less integrated. People are much less likely to attend a church or to be religiously observant in any tradition. Neighborhoods are like a lot of people don't know their neighbors, so you don't have that sense of kind of local social solidarity. So that's one layer of it, but I'd go deeper. You also want to atomize people by sort of making them unable to orient themselves in terms of place, time, in relation to others, and unable to orient themselves with reference to what is true. So on the first one, on place, we're rootless people in that we live in a culture that has valorized mobility and being able to move around and not be connected to a physically embodied place. So we're kind of drifting in the wind a little bit in that sense. Our mediating institutions, family, faith, community, these are all weakened. Our sense of where we are in time is weakened by what we described earlier, the attempt to kind of restart the calendar and repudiate and forget the past. And we've forgotten that we're actually mankind and society. We're part of an intergenerational compact, one that binds generations that come before us, those who are dead, those who are living, and those who are yet to be born. And instead, we're basically now, I think, quite consumed with our own generation and what we're doing now. So we've forgotten how to orient ourselves with reference to a broader view of time and intergenerational solidarity. But the most important of these is that we can't orient ourselves with reference to what is true and good. And this is where I'll go back and you might disagree with me and that'll be fun.
Hmm.
But this is where I have a very strong critique of the value subjectivity that is baked into so much of liberal thinking. The idea that everyone has their own truth, their own sense of the good life. These are all equal. No one's right. There's no objective values. And that is exactly what a totalitarian ruler would want, is people who can't say, this is true, this is just, this is good. Where all of those categories are treated as matters of mere opinion. They're just subjective, they're fungible. And the reason for that, I think, is obvious if you think about it. If there's no such thing as justice, then how are you supposed to critique a ruler who does unjust things? If there's no objective standard that is standing above mankind, above worldly power, there's no sort of, divinely or transcendently given source of moral truths, well, then how can you critique the exercise of power over you? What's the language that you can use to say, this thing that this ruler is doing is wrong, it is unjust, the thing that they're saying is not true, what they're doing is not good, it doesn't accord with moral laws or whatever. So by getting rid of those categories and saying that all of those categories are just a matter of subjective opinion, well, then you don't have any objective truth or justice or goodness. All you have is power. And whoever wields power gets to decide what's true, what's good, what's just, what they're going to do. And you don't have even the vocabulary anymore to express resistance to that. So value subjectivity is also, I would say, something that makes people highly susceptible to a state where it's just a conquest of wills, because there are no absolute values anymore. And so I would say then that the way of, and finally, okay, the last one, we've talked about sort of the loss of mediating institutions, the loss of any objective sense of what is true that we can root ourselves in and use that to evaluate how power is being exercised. But the other thing, though, is that we've lost mediating thoughts. And this is maybe the most insidious of all of these, is our capacity to remember things, to contemplate things, to have sort of silent moments where we can actually reflect seriously on what's happening around us. All of these have been dramatically eroded, especially in the last 15 years or so, with the advent of smartphones and the ubiquity of Google and all of these things that have so eroded our attention that we can't really remember anything. And I think too, like what an ideal situation if you wanted to be able to manipulate and control people, that people who have no memory are never going to hold you accountable for anything. We're so distracted by a daily flow of essentially useless information that we forget injustices and iniquities the moment they seem to pass. So I think those are some of the conditions that work very well to foster totalitarianism. And again, I'll go back. One of the really essential things there is where people can't agree on first principles, that truth exists, that there actually are some objective moral standards that should govern us, that justice is a real thing that exists and that's a good. If you can't agree on that, then every dispute in society becomes interminable, or it can only be resolved through force and through coercion and power. That's what cancel culture is to me. It's an attempt to say there are no objective moral truths, but we're going to coerce and scare and intimidate people into believing what we want them to believe. It's a naked assertion of power over people that doesn't depend on any substantive appeals to what's true or just or good. But as far as sort of what is really underlying all of this, the most useful theoretical lens that I apply to the problem of totalitarianism is one developed by Eric Voegelin, particularly in his book Science, Politics, and Gnosticism. So Voegelin was an Austrian political philosopher who fled Nazism and went over to the United States, and was, obviously, given his personal background, also fixated by this problem of totalitarianism. And
as you might be if you
as you might be if yes, if you have to flee the Nazis. And what he described it as was, in a way, it's all of what he would term contemporary Gnostic movements. So he's using Gnosticism as an ancient heresy, and he's sort of reappropriating the term. And it's not a one-for-one parallel, but there are similarities between the ancient heresy and the contemporary one. So what he terms are the modern Gnostic movements are all of these ideological movements from progressivism to positivism, National Socialism, communism, socialism. He would say that they're defined by a few qualities. One is that there's a general dissatisfaction with the way the world is. Now, that's totally understandable, right? Like, the world appears to us to have lots of injustice and unfairness in it. There's a lot of, the human condition is marked by suffering, right? So that's an understandable one. But whereas a lot of sort of classical or religious or philosophical approaches to the problem of human suffering is to say that we suffer because of the kinds of beings that we are, that we're fallen somehow, we have sin or karma or whatever you want to call it, and we need to practice internal moral rectitude to try to resolve that. The Gnostic temptation is the opposite. It doesn't look inward at the human condition or say that maybe we as human beings are, imperfect, fallen, ignorant, whatever. It says that no, it's the world that's wrong. It's the ordering of the cosmos and of the universe itself that is evil. And the next step in that process is to say that somehow we as human beings, we have the capacity through mastery of knowledge or gnosis to fix the world, to recreate it, to solve these iniquities. It's disordered and wrong, but somehow we can make it right if we just sort of take control over and assume power over the order of being and dominion over it through our mastery of technique, of science, of knowledge. Then we can remake the world, and then all these problems will be solved. And so, in a way, all of these movements, insofar as you think that that's an accurate description of what they're trying to do, in order for that project to make sense, says Vogelin, in order for the order of being, the order of the cosmos, the universe of the world, to be under man's control, you have to deny that we are created. You deny the givenness of the order of being, whether it's from a god or some other way of conceptualizing how we came to be created. But you have to deny the transcendent source of our existence. So it necessitates the murder of God, says Vogelin, in order for this project to seem to make sense. God has to be made into a creation of man, not the other way around. And then having murdered God, we can then begin to remake creation and reorder the world perfectly. I hope I'm describing this well enough.
No. I'm following this all.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah. So it's characterized
I would have
fundamentally by a kind of hatred of reality, a hatred of the order of being, and a belief also that reality, that truth itself, can be remade by man through power, through force, through mastery of knowledge. That's the fundamental progressive imperative. And that's a sort of a common thread that runs through a lot of these ideological movements of the 20th and 21st century. So I think that we're absolutely the dominant ideology under which we exist. And, we're often sort of impervious to it, or we don't notice it because it's the air we breathe. But it's afflicted by the same kind of idea that somehow there's something wrong in the world, but that we as human beings in our, it's a really hubristic, arrogant view, but we have the ability to achieve mastery over nature. We can change reality if we just pull the right levers. We can overcome nature and its limitations. We can break through all of this sort of seemingly, through natural limits, which we may experience as oppressive or unjust. And we can somehow destroy these, and then we'll be free, and then we'll be happy.
Thanks for making it all the way to the end of the video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment for us in the comments below. Let me know what you thought and if you'd like to see more of this from the show. Thank you, and we'll see you again next time.